morning.
Good morning. I'm just waiting for the go ahead from my IT crew. We're live.
This is the meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. Ms. Edwards, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Blanton,
Present.
Chair Bullock,
Present.
Madison Edwards, present. Dr. Elliott, Dr. Fleming,
Present.
Dr. Graham, Vice Chair Griffin, Ms. Hoskins,
Present.
Ms. Jenkins, Dr. Locklear,
You just joined.
Just join.
who did?
Dr.
You
Locklear
was-
did.
Oh, okay. Ms. Patton,
Present.
Dr. Penfield,
Present.
Mr. Smith,
Present.
Ms. Smith, Superintendent Green, Dr. Weddington,
Present.
Ms. Wisner, and Dr. Winter.
Present.
We do have quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, online visitors, and online listeners to the March 20th, 2025 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This Standards Commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation, licensure, continuing education, and professional standards of North Carolina educators. I am Ann Bullock, Chair of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, and I call this meeting to order. Our agenda materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the quote SBE meetings quote link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the e-board agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of the commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring this matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve this agenda for the March 20th meeting?
I move to approve the agenda. This is Randy.
Thank you, Randy.
Second, Alexandra.
Thank you, Alexandra. Any further questions? Discussion? Ms. Edwards, could you please call for the vote?
Dr. Blanton,
Approve.
Chair Bullock,
Approve.
Madison Edwards, approve. Dr. Fleming,
Approved.
Ms. Hoskins,
Approve.
Dr. Locklear,
Approve.
Ms. Patton,
Approve.
Dr. Penfield,
Approve.
Mr. Smith,
Approve.
Dr. Weddington,
Approve.
and Dr. Winter.
Approve.
The agenda is approved. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on February 13th, 2025 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved, Hank.
Thank you, Dr. Wellington.
Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. Ms. Edwards, any further discussion or corrections on the minutes? Hearing none, could we have a move for the vote, Ms. Edwards?
Dr. Blanton,
Approve.
Chair Bullock,
Approved.
Madison Edwards, approve. Dr. Fleming,
Approved.
Ms. Hoskins,
Approved.
Dr. Locklear,
Abstain. I wasn't at the last meeting.
Ms. Patton,
Approve.
Dr. Penfield,
Approved.
Mr. Smith,
Approve.
Dr. Weddington,
Approve.
and Dr. Winter.
Approve.
The minutes are approved. Thank you all. The link for the March 2025 State Board of Education meeting has been sent to you prior to this meeting. The recordings are bookmarked at the presentations for the Educator Standards and Practices ES&P Committee, which is the committee that handles the work of Pepsi. If anyone has questions, please let Dr. Evans know, and we will follow up during the April 2025 Pepsi meeting. We will now move to NCDPI staff updates and discussions. Is there anything in that area?
No, it's covered with the recording. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Dr. Kim Winter will present the Assessment and Performance Subcommittee recommendations for the CKT Math subtest requirement. Dr. Winter?
Good morning, everyone. So if you scroll a little bit down in the slides, I think Kim is maybe running that. Scope of work was for our committee to dig a little bit deeper into the math subtest data that we looked at as a group to make some recommendations. So if you go on to the next slide, you can see the legislative requirement that all elementary K-6 and special ed general curriculum teachers achieve a minimum score on subtest or standard exams in both the teaching of reading and math. And so if you keep going on the slide, you can see that we put a survey out there. We presented at both monthly HR and EPP webinars. We linked the survey when we talked to the data, and we did get a mix of responses from both PSUs and EPPs, about 23 responses overall. That next slide does go through some of the feedback results. You can see we got a variety of different kinds of recommendations, including reducing the math subtest cut score, which we did talk about and look at that analysis data and what that would actually benefit us, including having some additional ways to meet the requirement, things like a TPA in math, and other kinds of performances. So that gives you an overview of the feedback we received from stakeholders. And then if you scroll to the next slide, you'll see we went all over all of that together as a group and gave everyone time to talk to other stakeholders and give some recommendations. And then we came back together as a group, and this is where we landed. So basically, there are 4 items here. We would like to recommend a set of options for meeting the requirement. So one of those would be a TPA in elementary math. EVOS data is another bullet point there. And then current math assessments used, meaning the general curriculum math subtest or the CKT subtest in math, which is Praxis 7813. And then an additional using current math assessments, if the cut score is missed by 1 standard deviation, using that in addition to EVOS data, which if you look back at the PDF attached of the analysis, you can see that data. We looked at how that might make an impact in terms of increasing numbers or changing those that data. We also wanted to make some recommendations around support for beginning teachers. So this idea of continuous support and communication with EPPs and PSUs, building in support to the beginning teacher process, and then potentially mandatory training or professional development, if you will, workshop type thing to help pass the assessment if it was not passed by a standard error of measurement. So, yep, those are our final recommendations of the group, and we open it up to the commission to hear feedback and questions that folks may have.
Comments or questions regarding the recommendations? Including things you might like or would be also additional.
This is Connie. I like the mandatory training. Is this mandatory training, will this be after the first attempt or for them not passing the test? Or would it be after multiple attempts, or how does that work?
So that's a really good question. I think part of it depends on timing. So, candidates they are likely to be taking the exam while they're still a candidate with an EPP. Many of the EPPs require candidates to at least take the exam. So I think timing is one thing that could come into play there. And likely the sort of rule of implementation, part of that would probably be up to the PSU, unless we made a specific rule that said going into the first job, if you've not passed it by more than a standard error of measurement, then you automatically are enrolled in. That's probably the simplest way to do it, but we didn't get down into those weeds, if you will.
I just think it would be great to have something universal instead of, because one LEA may say this, another LEA may say that. So I think it would be great to have a universal standard as it relates to this. Maybe it's after the first test for sure. Go ahead and provide that training, because it costs so much to take the test. So if we go ahead and give them the training after the first test, then hopefully by the second time they'll perform a lot better and pass the test. So I do think instead of just saying this is just my opinion, instead of saying it's up to the LEA, I think what happens is you have so much discrepancy across the state. If it was more of a universal statement that everyone would have to adhere to, all LEAs, then I think it would work better, but that's just my opinion.
No, I agree. I see a lot of head shaking on folks who are on video. I think any sort of specificity we can provide would be helpful. There are different ways that folks do it. I mean, some actually do face-to-face workshop like training with their candidates, but there are plenty of online modules, online sort of software practice systems, even just engaging and taking the practice exams in and of themselves can be helpful to steer a candidate in the direction of where they need improvement. So I think that specificity could be helpful.
I would kind of, I really like that idea. And the way I was thinking about this when I was reading this was that we would hope people would share, right? So if an EPP has created something or a PSU has created something, that there would be a central location of resources that could be pulled on, and this wouldn't cause undue burden on small districts, so to say. That there would be things that they could, virtual things they could enroll in, that would allow them to share across the state. So I really like the idea of, if you've taken it once, or even before, if you want to go through some of the training before, that you could just enroll in it and do it. But if you don't pass it, you have to do it, because part of the CKT test in particular is the way they present the questions. Sometimes candidates will know the content, but there are about 4 different ways they present questions that are that it's best if you practice having questions presented to you in that manner before you take the test and think from that manner. So I really like that idea.
I do too. I've shared with my folks many times where I was previously, we actually required our candidates to come in and take a practice exam, and they were simply the release tests and materials from online, but they practiced it. We scored it. They got their score. We had faculty there in the areas to meet with them and go over questions they had, go over content, et cetera. And we sort of made a day of it, if you will. And sometimes it was a little bit of a kick in the rear, a little bit of, oh, wow, I'm really not prepared in this proportion, this percentage of the test, and I need to spend some time. And that's what folks needed, to do that. I think part of the issue will be, some of the online modules and online systems, there's a fee for that. And so as an EPP at Western, we actually pay for access to some of those systems. And so even our alums, and so whenever we're going through appeals process for licensure or other kinds of things, we make sure that the school system and the candidate know that they still have access to those even after they have graduated. But some of the resources, of course, as you might imagine, there are paywalls. So that would be a bit of a barrier, but I think something we could work out.
Kim, this is Randy. I have a question about the last bullet point where it says mandatory training to pass assessment if did not pass by one SEM. I just want to make sure I'm understanding right. That means that if they didn't pass, but didn't pass by if they were one standard error measurement below the cut, so you could not pass but be a half standard error from below the cut and not have to do the mandatory training?
Well, if you look up at the top in terms of options, what we're suggesting in the last bullet there is that if someone missed it by up to one standard error of measurement, that in combination with EVOS data would allow them to be in a passing category. And that's some of the data on the slides. If you look at that exam analysis on down into the slides. Mine aren't numbered because they're PDF, I'm sorry. But anyway, if you look down, it shows like how many additional candidates would pass if we put things like that in place. So that's what that is what that's suggesting in the top.
Thank you.
Maybe we could clarify that on the test prep. So maybe the idea would be mandatory training to pass assessment if the SEM plus EVOS data is not met.
I think that's a good idea.
Just as clarity.
Mhm. We hadn't originally set out to add these additional kinds of things. However, in our conversations and the things we were hearing from stakeholders around the state was, that support is a big piece of this. So we really wanted to put some things here as a nod to say we're all sort of in this together to support our candidates. And there are things we could do besides just changing a cut score, which, as we know from looking at the data, does not really make a significant difference.
Dr. Tomerlin, did you have a question or a comment? Your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair Bullock. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I mean, so EVOS data. So the way I'm reading this is a certain level of EVOS data on its own would allow you to convert the license. Missing the cut score by one SEM plus a different range of EVOS data would allow you to clear the license. And then one SEM within the cut score plus EVOS data that is outside that range would trigger mandatory training for the applicant. Does that clear the license, or does that allow, is that the recommendation before retesting or some other option?
So thanks for muddying the water. I think I'm just teasing
So
you.
sorry.
No, I think that's excellent.
And don't feel like you have to answer it now. I'm just, I just want to have it in my head for helping with the policy recommendation for this or the legislative ask. I want to make sure I'm
100%. And I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to speak for other people, but speak instead from, what we talked about as a group and what we were hearing. And honestly, the basic idea was simply if you're not passing, even if you're, if you're considering EVOS data plus where you were with your passing score, you're not there, we're suggesting some sort of training module, etc. So we probably don't need to say it in such a complicated way. We could probably back up and be much more simplistic to say, if you're not passing, an additional step needs to be taken in terms of professional development, training module, wherever we end up. I don't necessarily think we have to muddy it by saying all of those additional kinds of things.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
And I'm a high school person, but just for clarification, the EVOS would only apply to 3-5 teachers, but not K2 teachers, correct? Is there an option alternative for the K2s that don't have that EVOS data?
So for K2 teachers, you would be restricted to EVOS in reading,
In just reading.
not mathematics.
So that would
For the high school, it would be only those teachers who are teaching Math 1
and
to students who did not take Math 1 in middle school, or Math 3 teachers who are teaching students who took Math 1 in middle school. So you would have a very restricted range. Well, high school, I mean, I assume we're talking about, well, this is confined to elementary in the math related to the subtests for elementary licensure. So yes, you would only have 3 through 6 because the license extends from K6. And so if you were teaching 6th grade math, you could use that evidence for clearing the elementary level license, but not 7th or 8th grade math.
So in essence, it would mean this isn't an option. The last bullet point wouldn't really be an option for K2 teachers. It would be
Right, but they could,
or the second
but
book.
they
So they're
could,
limited in their options, and I just wondered do they have other options since they don't have EVOS data, or they just have to go with the 2 bullets that do apply to them?
right, so they could do the Ed TPA in math instead of doing a different Ed TPA, and that would be an option for them as well. That's why we wanted a menu, Shannon, so that it would be try to hit across different grade levels and what is available. I think Dr. Penfield had his hand up, so I don't know if he still had a question.
It's been addressed. Thank you, though.
Okay. So Dr. Winter, just to be clear, the EVOS data second bullet point really relates to the bottom one in the first round. It's not a separate thing. Is that correct? Or am I incorrect on that?
I think that that's correct because you can't meet it with only your EVOS data.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's not if you read the legislation, that's not an examination, so to speak. Going
All
back.
right. So Dr. Evans, can you just strike through that or remove that from the slide, please?
Sorry,
On
could
the
you
second
repeat
bullet.
that? I missed what exactly
It's the second
Did
bullet.
you,
the
could
second
you just
bullet
remove the
here,
second bullet? No, in the
up
first
here.
part.
Oh, this.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And then I just had a question about this mandatory training. Do we want to say after the first
Attempt.
yes,
Yeah,
after
I
first
think-
attempt?
I think so.
And then do we want to say this part if this part is not met, or another option? Because if they complete it with another option, then they wouldn't take the mandatory training, correct?
Well, so the only way they'd be considered passed is if they met the things above. So we're just really talking about people who haven't quote unquote passed. I mean, and I don't know that
Right.
you could say it after first attempt and leave it at that, but you could also just say simply after. I mean, what if someone, it's their second attempt or third attempt? Do we not want them to engage in any kind of professional development? I mean, I think that's a bigger question as well. That the idea behind making the suggestion was that they're getting continuous support.
So do we just want to say mandatory training to pass assessment? If not, if one of the options is not met above?
We could, Tom, you have your hand up. Is it related to this? I didn't know if you had something related to this.
It is. So the data that we have on repetitive attempts suggests that the probabilities are fairly low after the second attempt. And so really discouraging. I don't think you're trying to create a mandate, but discouraging educators from just repeatedly going to sign up for the test without some kind of intervention, I think is a really good recommendation from this group. You want the districts to, to recognize these folks and get them some kind of training or professional learning to try to bolster those pass rates. My question, so that part, not sure, mandatory, whatever you want to do with that, but I think this is a strong recommendation that these folks not be encouraged just to take it again without the district doing something to intervene, the district and or the EPP, whatever the case may be. Like that first part. The second part, I do have a question. If below 1 SEM and or EVOS data is not met, maybe that's what we mean. So if they're below 1 SEM, you still want them to, if they're below 1 SEM and the EVOS data is within range that you've identified above, this reads to me like they wouldn't require additional training. And I think it should be well, I shouldn't say it that way. My recommendation would be to phrase it, if below 1 SEM and or EVOS data is not met, that triggers some kind of intervention. Either one of those events would trigger some kind of intervention for the teacher.
I agree. And I think from a holistic perspective, that's exactly what we were talking about. And I'll just be honest with you. I mentioned this before, in our licensure process, I send a letter out to the PSU and the candidate, and we give a lot of detailed information and highly encourage the alumni to engage in the trainings and things that we offer. And there's multiple different options. And the numbers that do that are very, very small. So, I think the more we can do to strongly stop just an immediate re-registering for the test, just to take it again and try again, but put some kind of intervention there. I just think there's a better chance of folks being successful if something is happening besides just re-registering and waiting the minimum amount of days.
Right. I think Dr. Locklear also had her hand up. I'm just trying to help you look, Kim. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. But I think both of you answered my question. I just, going back to that bottom statement, I just think the mandatory is training for anyone who does not pass the assessment. And I think having that training, regardless of the last statement, is vital. I think going back to what Dr. Winter says, if we can provide them the support they need, instead of just saying you didn't pass it this time, you got a few more months and you go back, and without that training, it's just a revolving door. And I think it's just important if we would just say mandatory training to anyone who has not passed the assessment. And then most people, if they see that they're not going to pass it, they just may decide to change. But if you give them that training, that support, it could lead to much better results. So I just think maybe, I don't even know if we need that last statement, because I don't want someone who doesn't fall within this range to say, oh, that doesn't apply to me. And so I have no training, I have no support.
So just to be clear, Dr. Locklear, basically you're suggesting training after any attempt that's not passed.
Yes, and I think that people, if they realize, most individuals, if they have that support, I think it's just going to open the door for them to perform better. But they're just walking back in, taking the test, and it's just a revolving door. But I just don't think we need the stipulation at the end, just because right now we're struggling for teachers and we need to provide anyone the support they need to help them become successful.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public school side, that representatives, that has any comments about these recommendations?
Well, I'm public school. I was
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious to go back to Dr. Tomperlin's point about the bullet that we eliminated with the EVAS, and whether or not we really do want to consider that if someone has strong enough EVAS, that as meeting the requirement, and then a different range of EVAS to be combined with the assessment score as an additional option, because the way it looks now, there really is the Ed TPA and the current math assessments, and that's it. So I mean, like, to me, I wonder if we need to consider that a differential within the EVAS data.
So the law in and of itself is about examination score requirements. And
Oh,
it
gotcha.
says
Okay.
that you have to have a prescribed minimum score on a subtest or standard examination. And a TPA is considered an examination, but EVAS would not be. Regardless of what any of our opinions are about any of that, I mean, that I think we do have to go back to that legislation to see if we're meeting that.
Thank you for clarifying, Dr. Winter.
The only thing that I would have to add is I would agree with Dr. Locklear. I mean, I think that the more interventions we can put in place to help these people pass it, the better off we're going to be. So I agree with that statement for sure.
Great.
Two things I'll say is, one, I agree on the and not just this, but all of our teacher licensure exams. Our folks pay and fail, and then maybe they're lucky and they pass one. But going to the EVAS data, what legal, I know there was a state that was sued over using EVAS data on a teacher effectiveness, and I know I just don't. And Tom, you may know this, but is there anything there we need to be careful with when we're going to be making decisions based on EVAS data?
Aaron,
So,
he did put something in the chat too, so
Oh.
go ahead, Tom.
I did see something pop up.
yes, so Houston ISD.
Yes, yeah.
They were making employment decisions related to EVAS. So I think, I would need our legal to weigh in on this. I think what we're doing is offering a solution that it doesn't deny anybody if they otherwise met the conditions and had low EVAS. So we're not saying, even if you passed the math assessment, but your EVAS was negative, we're not going to issue you the license. Where it's not restrictive in that way. It's only allowing the use of that data to the benefit of the educator if he or she meets that condition. So I do see it a little differently, but it's certainly something that we may be, that we may want to check with legal to make sure we're not entering a realm that's going to get us involved in a lawsuit.
That makes sense, Tom. Thank you. Yeah, and even as superintendent, and speaking with principals, we get a little worried in this area as well because of the Texas situation. So thank you.
Yeah.
So just to go back in some of our conversations and two specific recommendations I've heard from commission members is potentially altering the last bullet on the screen to say something along the lines of mandatory training to pass the assessment after any attempt. I mean, I guess you could say any failed attempt, but it's also sort of assumed rather than saying anything else, just saying a mandatory intervention after any attempts.
I think that represents what Dr. Locklear was saying, and she can confirm.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think
Doc-
we have a couple of people
Yeah.
make that suggestion, and I'm
Good.
open to that. I think generally speaking, it feels like there's good consensus that we want there to be an intervention. So
I would add that if someone doesn't pass the Ed TPA, we would also want them to have an intervention and support. So leaving it after any attempt, like that would fall into that same category if we take the last phrase off.
And can we
Okay.
make the attempt singular, please?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And then take the phrase off, is that
Take
correct?
the phrase off. We
correct.
love to vote it, yeah.
Okay.
And like I mentioned before, all of this is complicated by the fact of whether a candidate is still in their EPP or not. So for example, in any of our EPPs, when a candidate does not pass a TPA in the semester, there is already extensive intervention that occurs leading up to a second attempt. And that does change. It's not that there isn't support, but it is different once someone has graduated from an EPP.
Could we also possibly on that top bullet for test preparation can we put EPP/BTSP? Because if they take the first attempt while they're enrolled in an EPP, then the intervention should happen there.
Correct.
And also it makes it not seem that it's just beyond.
Yeah. And I think those were originally written out that way because again, assumptions made, there are interventions that are put in place at APPs now, but anywhere we can add that clarification, I think it makes good sense.
Dr.
Great.
Tomberlin's raising his hand.
All right. Let's hear what he has to say.
I apologize. I know being high maintenance this morning, Dr. Winter, but so my assumption, and I just want to check this assumption, is with the EdTPA elementary math, I think we find that most teachers in elementary ed take the reading. So even if you pass the reading, you could, the suggestion is to allow the use of the candidate to go back and take the elementary math as a way to demonstrate their competency to hold as a passing for a subtest of math. If that's so,
Correct.
I think that goes to, you may not know that so I'm just thinking about the articulation of they pass the reading Ed TPA, they fail the math licensure content exam. Then is there mandatory training from that result before they take the math Ed TPA? I guess maybe I'm getting too in the weeds about this, but I just want to recognize that most people in elementary are taking the reading Ed TPA, and so we just clarifying that you would take this in addition. If you wanted to go that route, you would take this in addition to the the reading portion of this. And then that creates the situation, can one just qualify for the license by passing both the elementary reading and the elementary math at TPA?
Yes, all of that is true. And I think we were trying to avoid getting too far deep into the woods because I think a lot of things will play out here. Some APPs may make the decision just to do elementary math in future. Some may not. I think if a candidate, takes their exam and doesn't pass it, the candidates will need to be presented with their options. And so they may say, you know what, I don't want to do the exam. I'd rather do Ed TPA. And so we could provide resources for that. And so I think a lot of different things could happen, but to answer your questions, yes, you could qualify is what we're saying by taking elementary math, not by taking the literacy at TPA, the reading one, but you could by the math.
So there's nothing in the state either that says that you have to take the reading. So a savvy person, if this were to go forth, would say, I'm going to do the math at TPA, and then I'm gonna have that out of the way for at TPA and for this licensure test for math. They still have to take the Pearson literacy test. So even if they do the reading, the literacy at TPA, they still have to take the Pearson literacy test. So if you're looking at the big, so this will be more of a communication piece, I think, for folks, and a reason for people, HR and EPPs to think about what would be the best combo for folks.
It's also very early in legislative season yet, and I've already read a draft of a bill that would not even allow us to require students to attempt tests, and many of the EPPs require that. And so, again, having candidates fully understand what their options are may become even more important because they really will be their options.
Yes.
We just always say EdTPA requires a special level of guided support and intervention. And, this we're venturing into Kim's personal opinions here, but it is difficult to support something like that without having close contact with the candidate. It gets harder, certainly once they leave us.
Any other comments? Thank you very much to the subcommittee for this work. Any other comments on the options? So these are recommendations that we would like to take forward to the state board as to see how they respond to them. So they're not fleshed out, right? So we don't know what the EVOS score is. So we would like to think about taking these forward. So do I have a motion to approve the recommendations as written per the discussion for the math subset requirement to be sent to the state board in April?
I make a motion to approve the recommendations as written and move them on to the state board.
Thank you, Chris.
I
May I have
second Connie.
Thank you, Dr. Locklear. Any further comments or discussion? Ms. Edwards, could you please call the roll for the vote?
I can call the roll for the vote.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
thank you, Dr. Evans.
We got knocked out. The DPI staff, we got knocked out. At least two of us did, unexpectedly. Three of us. Okay. Dr. Blanton.
Welcome back. Sorry.
Dr.
Approved.
Blanton.
Approved.
Chair Bullock. Thank you, Chris.
Approve.
Dr. Fleming.
Approved.
Miss Edwards.
Approved.
Miss Patton.
Approved.
Dr. Locklear.
Approve.
Dr. Penfield.
Approve.
Miss Hoskins.
Approve.
Dr. Weddington.
Approve.
Mr. Smith.
Approve.
And Dr. Winter.
Approve.
And who gave the first for the motion and the second?
Chris Blanton did the motion.
Okay.
And Dr. Locklear did the second.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Locklear, I just want you to know that I consider you representing both EPPs and public schools. I think you're representing both, so. All right, so the motion carries. Thank you all very much. I want to thank the subcommittee for wrestling with this and coming up with some creative options to try to help move licensure forward for more teachers in North Carolina, and also thinking about it from a support from both EPPs and PSUs. I think it's an excellent piece of this recommendation, and we will see what the state board has to say about this. And if anyone wonders, this came from a request from the state board to think through some options, and that's why we've been working on this for the last few months. So I'm sure this will come back when we have to figure out what they like and don't like and what we do next. So, all right, thank you all. Next, Ms. Erin Larkin McGuire will present on the internship guidelines of the principal for principals.
Madam
This is
Chair, this is Derek Jordan, and I will kick us off.
And this says the principal portfolio assessment. So are we not seeing, are the guidelines in here, Dr. Jordan, or are we moving to this?
We're doing the principal portfolio assessment first, and then the internship requirements second. Sorry about that,
Okay.
Dr. Bullock.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about the portfolio assessment. Dr. Jordan.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chairman Bullock and members of the commission. Good morning. Next slide, please. We would like to update you on where we are with respect to Session Law 2023-125, which was enacted in September of 2023. It required Pepsi, in consultation with the department and the Principal Fellows Commission, to develop a portfolio-based system to be used in applications for all administrator licensure candidates. And we were required, as you may recall, pursuant to law, to present recommendations to the state board for approval by June 15th of 2024. Here you have the timeline. A lot took place over the course of time that intervened between approval and ultimately moving to the state board and back before Pepsi. You will recall that we had endeavored towards meeting the requirements in law in keeping with the timeline, but ran into some hiccups, which we will briefly mention shortly. Next slide, please. We will begin now with the section of the presentation that involves Erin Larkin McGuire, who has helped to facilitate our work, the work of the task force, which was instituted. Erin, are you able to hear us?
I am, and can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Jordan, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for having me. So as Dr. Jordan has referred to, we have been in front of Pepsi a few previous times on our journey towards fulfilling the obligation in law to implement a portfolio-based assessment for principal licensure. And we share this framework with the commission to remind ourselves that the portfolio is a piece of a larger puzzle of principal licensure. The portfolio relates to standards. Also, it is relates to program completion. So we say this because, and as Dr. Bullock, as you referenced in a little bit, we're also going to be talking about the internship. The portfolio and the internship relate to one another. They also relate to coursework. They also relate to standards, meaning that the portfolio is very important and we're excited to roll out this initiative, but it also doesn't carry all of the weight in determining whether a candidate is qualified to be a principal in the future, right? It is an important piece of the puzzle and is an important new step forward. Dr. Evans, if you could advance the slide. And we have not been undertaking this alone. We've had a really tremendous task force that's been working with us for over a year now, comprised of a really diverse set of representatives from our education or preparation programs, as well as superintendents, principals, and sitting assistant principals. And this diversity of perspective has been tremendous in informing the recommendation that we're bringing to you today, and the pivot that we've made away from the Cal APA to the Massachusetts PAL assessment, which is where we are. Dr. Evans, if you could advance it. So things that have not changed since we were last in front of Pepsi in endeavoring to identify an approach for a portfolio-based assessment for North Carolina, we defined a clear set of criteria presented here. I'll just briefly describe them. There's a set of pedagogical criteria. One, the portfolio-based assessment needs to align with North Carolina standards. EPP flexibility. We didn't want to commit to a strategy that forced EPPs into a narrow or restricted programmatic structure. We still wanted flexibility to flourish. Scope, that it needs to cover, meaningfully cover a high priority standards. We're going to come back to this point again, but just want to plant the seed here that no portfolio-based assessment, EdTPA is an example of a portfolio-based assessment included, really ever covers every little bit of every standard. And that's why it's important to remember that the portfolio exists in concert with coursework and internship as part of our overall approach to licensure. Validity and reliability. Current state, our EPPs are implementing portfolios, but they're not valid nor are they reliable, which limits our ability to make inferences from that data. And in the rollout of a statewide strategy, we greatly increase our ability to use that data to inform our perspective. User experience, it has to be a good experience for candidates. Nobody wants to ask a principal candidate to do something that doesn't feel like a high value use of their time or a meaningful measure of their knowledge and skill. It also needs to fit a set of practical criteria. So we've already fulfilled this obligation, just to name that at the outset, that we had previously presented a recommendation to Pepsi, which voted to recommend it to the state board, which then did approve that course of action. And we're no longer able to pursue that strategy. So we've already fulfilled this timeline obligation as in practice, but we need to get going to get it rolled out to actual candidates. Cost to candidates. We know there's going to be some costs, and it's important that Dr. Evans, if you go back, I'll come back to that in a second, that it's commensurate with other state licenses. I'll talk about that in just a second. But at the same time, it needs to be budget neutral. So the law that indicates that we need to switch to a portfolio-based assessment doesn't specify any allocation of new funds or budgetary resources. And so the strategy needs to operate in a budget neutral way. That relates to criteria E down at the bottom under scoring capacity. North Carolina Department of Public Instruction does not have line item funding to fund scoring of a portfolio-based assessment. So that led us to partnering with a vendor, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But at the same time, we also want it to be customized. We knew it was unlikely that there was going to be a straightforward plug and play approach out there in the field. This is not new information. This has also not changed since we were in front of Pepsi. And so that's important that the strategy that we're presenting to you today is as aligned with these criteria as all previous conversations. So Dr. Evans, if you could advance the next slide. So when we were previously in front of Pepsi back in the spring, we were advancing the Cal APA as the foundation that we were going to use to develop a North Carolina-based assessment, which we did, which you all advanced, which the state board endorsed. And then we hit some unfortunate challenges outside of our locus of control that made it not possible to continue to move forward with the Cal APA, wholly outside of our control. But if you see the Cal APA and the Massachusetts PAL side by side, since the beginning of this process, they have equally been, let's call it, equivalently green. Since the beginning, both the Cal APA and the Massachusetts PAL have fulfilled our criteria. The reason that we did not engage with the Massachusetts PAL at the outset was related to cost to candidates. The Massachusetts PAL, and I'll show you just in a second, is originally in its design a 4-task assessment, which means more cost for scoring, which means more cost to candidates. And at the time, at the beginning of this process, we did not believe it was possible to reduce one of the tasks and therefore reduce the cost to candidates. And so we didn't consider the MA-PAL side by side with the Cal APA because we knew that that cost was going to be not commensurate to other licenses, and the task force felt very strongly that cost to candidates matters as a criteria. We've since learned that that is malleable, and that's why we feel really excited and confident to present the MA-PAL as a path forward. And to be plain, if we had understood that that was malleable way back at the beginning, we may have advanced the MA-PAL as the first approach, not approaching it here in a secondary format. But Dr. Evans, if you could advance the slide. So just a bit about the Massachusetts PAL to re-ground us in the context here. It was created by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in partnership with Bank Street College. It's implemented by Pearson that has conducted very rigorous reliability and validity studies over time. It's also been in use in the field for several years in Massachusetts. And as a colleague from Pearson actually said in a conversation just the other day, like, we've gotten all the kinks out. They've tried it, they've used it, they've gathered data, they've made adjustments over time. And so we have the benefit of that historical information. It's been in use in the field. At the same time, however, Massachusetts has agreed that we can customize it to meet North Carolina context and cost. That customization comes in a couple different flavors. The most important one, which puts us back in the running for us, is to only use 3 of what are the original 4 performance-based tasks. So there are originally 4 tasks designed in this assessment. 1, leadership through a vision for high student achievement. 2, instructional leadership for professional learning culture. 3, leadership in observing, assessing, and supporting individual teacher effectiveness. And 4, leadership for family engagement and community involvement. Dr. Evans, if you could advance. So when we think about these tasks, this is looking at the Cal APA and the Massachusetts PAL side by side at a task by task comparison, if you will. So we've already indicated the Cal APA originally has 3 tasks. The Massachusetts PAL assessment has 4 in its original design. They're really similar. So when you actually look, even you can just see it just in the titles of the tasks. So the Cal APA, the first task is analyzing data to drive school improvement. The Massachusetts PAL is leadership through a vision for high student achievement. When you review these 2 tasks side by side, they're formatted differently. The exact wording is a little bit different, but the foundational task is extremely similar. And that matters to the context of this body because this body has already endorsed the use of the Cal APA as a rigorous criteria-aligned approach for the portfolio-based assessment. And we would offer that the Massachusetts PAL is really just not that different at a high level. It's just not that different. And when we advanced the Cal APA, it only had 3 tasks. And so even though the Massachusetts PAL has a 4th task, by removing it, we keep the cost manageable for candidates. And we also stay in the same hemisphere of content and standards coverage as we already were with the Cal APA strategy. Dr. Evans, if you could advance. So a little bit about that coverage and coverage of standards. As we indicated at the outset, the portfolio exists in concert with other components of licensure. And as we know, as you all know from practitioners, when we offer a performance-based assessment, it's not the same as asking a test that has 100 questions and we can ask 1 question per standard and know we've checked all the boxes. The holistic, more reality-based, performance-based assessment allows us to go deeper with the standards that are most effectively assessed in that format. And so what you're looking at here is a map of coverage, as you will. The North Carolina Standards for School Executives on the left, the task force analysis. I will say the NCPPA is how we are referring to the North Carolina Applied version of the Massachusetts PAL, and we'll use that language going forward. And so that middle column shows us the task force analysis of how this assessment aligns and meaningfully assesses North Carolina's standards. So there was no question, no concern about standards 1, 2, 3, and 4. They have a strong presence in this assessment. They are very meaningfully and comprehensively assessed. For standard 5, 6, and 7, they're partially assessed. That's also aligned with what was previously true about the Cal APA. The task force recommended some slight revisions to increase the coverage of external development leadership, standard 6 there. But if you look at the box on the blue, we asked the task force if we should do more. Should we do more to modify these tasks to turn those kind of peach colored boxes green, for example, to get to even greater coverage of those standards? And the task force actually said no. We actually even looked at some ways that we could do it. And they said no, it diluted the task a little bit. And they felt strongly that our ed prep programs can, and in many cases already do, meaningfully address and assess these standards via coursework, fieldwork, and the internship. So, for example, on managerial leadership, the portfolio may assess part of a candidate's ability to do it, but every ed prep program in our task force said, yeah, but we've got a whole course on that. I can show you all the assessments that are built into our program that assess a candidate's ability in this way. The same with the others. Also, in some contexts, it's just not an appropriate fit for a portfolio-based assessment or for an intern's task in completing a portfolio-based assessment. Okay, that was a lot of information. Dr. Evans, we're going to pause here for questions. I would certainly also invite Dr. Jordan or any DPI colleagues to highlight or name any key components that I may have glossed over or not stamped well enough, but would love to pause here, hear any and all questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Aaron or the DPI or Dr. Jordan or the DPI staff? Aaron, it must have been clear.
There we go. Yeah, I'll take that, Dr. Bullock. We hope that this just feels like really a continuation of this, a pivot, but back on the same track that we were already on, and it's just not that different, but it is equally viable for implementation purposes. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Bullock, may I just say a couple things?
Yes.
So one, we have our Pearson friend here today, and we appreciate his presence on the technical side if there were any technical questions. We would also just like to acknowledge, I can't say enough, how grateful we are to all of the folks who've been involved in this protracted process. As Ms. Larkin McGuire indicated, they have been diligent, and we appreciate where we are. I should also just note as my final comment, we are beyond pleased to note that Pearson has indicated to us that all of the behind the scenes paperwork requirements, etc., have been taken care of. So we don't anticipate hiccups like what we experienced before moving forward.
Wonderful. This portfolio assessment, the Pearson portfolio assessment recommendation, because this is the first time we've talked about this particular assessment in Pepsi, we will have a called meeting. We plan to have a call meeting next Thursday to vote on it. You've received that calendar invite at 8 a.m. So at this point, we're just asking questions and such. And so that way, if anyone in the field or you're representing a group and you think, oh, I need to make sure this group understands, and if they have any questions, we want this week to be able to do that. Since we went through the CAL APA and that was brought forward and such, we feel like people know this is out there, but we also want to make sure we don't move something without the field at least having the opportunity for a few days to say, I have this question or that question. And the other piece of that is the reason for the week is because we want to move this forward if that is the desire of the commission, so that EPP's programs can get to work and move it to the state board so things can move forward. Folks have been waiting for this decision, and we really appreciate all the work of the task force, which has provided a great stakeholder group who've been, as Dr. Jordan said, very involved. And Ms. Larkin McGuire has done an excellent job moving them forward and giving them homework consistently in order to really think through this decision. So it was not a light decision from the task force, but we will come back to this piece next week for a vote. Any questions on that?
Chair Bullock,
Yes.
one last comment. So staff will be deploying a communication to the deans and MSA contacts just to
Okay.
provide an update on what has been shared today. And included as a part of that communication will be a Pepsi email address wherein folks will be able to share any feedback that they have, so it can all be funneled into one direction, and we will share that with all members of the commission.
Great. That's wonderful. All right. All right. We have a second part related to the internship. Erin, is that still you?
Still me. Can't get rid of
All
it.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So as we already indicated, the portfolio and the internship hold hands, right? The internship is not the only, but a primary vehicle whereby a candidate has the opportunity to try out all of the things that we want them to be able to do and demonstrate their ability to do so through the portfolio. Again, that's not the purpose of the internship is not wholly the portfolio, but it's an important strategy. So first, just where we are in the current rules. There are 3 places where current requirements for principal internships live. Dr. Evans, if you could advance. So 1, the same session law that prescribes the implementation of a portfolio-based assessment also for the first time set a foundation number of hours, 500 hours in law, as the recommendation for the minimum number of hours. Prior to that, there had been no officially in policy and a rule, no official requirement for the number of hours. So session law prescribes that. And then there are 2 existing rules from the state board that describe some of the features and requirements for the internship. It's great that they are there. We'll name that they're not very thick. There's not a lot of information or context in the current rules. So where we are, and this is, I think it's fair to characterize this conversation as an early stage conversation. So it will likely be a bit of time before we arrive at a moment at which Pepsi is voting on anything. The purpose of this conversation is to socialize and get feedback on the thinking that the task force has done to recommend revision to these rules. And we acknowledge that rulemaking is a complex and detailed process that takes time. We fully understand that. But the hopeful end goal of this process would be to revise these 2 rules, and which then provides all ed prep providers with a much more detailed set of information to use in anchoring their internship designs. So just for your own headspace, this is please, any and all questions. This is getting feedback on this, knowing that there's a bit of a journey ahead to get these into rules. So first, just anchoring, what's the purpose of the internship rules? We spent a lot of time aligning this with the task force, because the task force is full of really tremendous leaders who in many cases set really high bars at their ed prep programs for what an internship should look like. And we had to align on the fact that the purpose of state level rules is not to design an ideal internship, right? It's not to prescribe every little nook and cranny of what should happen at every EPP. Instead, we're defining the floor. What must be true for an EPP to then design their own internship? And 3 things feel very important. 1, that the internship is an opportunity for practical application, not just conceptual understanding. We don't want you just knowing things. We want you to be able to do things. 2, that this is establishing the minimum criteria, as I just said. And 3, that it increases the coherence and rigor of the statewide approach to principal preparation. So in a similar way to which the implementation of the portfolio-based assessment will increase kind of the common language across principal candidacy, so too would a revised set of rules on the internship. Thank you, Dr. Evans. At the same time, and I'm mindful that this relates very conceptually and holistically to the conversation you all have been having about the EdTPA and math testing and teacher candidacy, we want to seek to increase the rigor, coherence, and impact of the principal internship without creating new systemic barriers to principal certification. So it felt very important that we say, okay, if the internship needs to be this and this and this and this, we don't say, okay, well, now nobody gets to be a principal because it's now impossible to complete the principal internship. We were very intentional about that at the outset. And this is where the diversity of perspective on the task force was critical because they all represented very different constituencies. Well, what about this candidate? What about that candidate? What about this program context? And we continuously said we kept pressure testing our thinking to make sure that we weren't creating unnecessary barriers. Thank you, Dr. Evans. Next slide. So just like for the portfolio, we defined a set of criteria. We workshopped these, developed them collaboratively with the task force. There were things that we want to be true about the internship rules. One, fulfillment of purpose. That if we follow these rules, we do what they say to do, that it will lead to a well-designed internship that immerses the candidate in the role, provides authentic opportunities, gets the candidate behind the scenes access, and broad exposure to the responsibilities of principalship. It also needs to be standards aligned, that it is meaningfully aligned with the principal standards. And similar like to and this is where it fits with the portfolio-based assessment. The internship is one opportunity for candidates to complete the tasks in the portfolio-based assessment. And it's also an opportunity for them to practice with tasks that might not be directly assessed by the portfolio-based assessment, both and. So they really work in concert together. Candidate feasibility. It had to be doable. It had to be accomplishable within the minimum number of hours required. So if we're going to say that 500 hours is the minimum, it has to be possible and feasible to complete all of the relevant tasks in a 500-hour internship. And that observability. So we're not proposing a new statewide accountability strategy that quote unquote inspects the way which internships are operating at prep program. Not suggesting that at all. But we wanted to offer things that we would have a way of knowing, are we doing this or are we not doing this? That if we were to have a conversation with an ed prep program and say, are you doing this, this, and this in your internship? We can actually see and determine if those things are happening. Next slide, Dr. Evans. At the same time, there were risks that we were guarding against, similar to wanting to not create new systemic barriers. Some risks that we were guarding against. One, district school feasibility. We didn't want to prescribe something that then all of a sudden made a district say, well, now I don't want any principal candidates anymore. Why would I want to host an intern? You made this too hard. You made this too cumbersome. You made it too burdensome for my district. I can't host any interns. We didn't want to do that, right? That's a risk we're guarding against. Same with multiple pathways. North Carolina is tremendous in that it resources a stipend for full-time candidates, but not all candidates are full-time candidates. And so we needed to not unduly burden a candidate in a particular pathway. Multiple contexts. We also have candidates teaching in all sorts of different schools, some in independent schools, parochial schools, rural schools, large urban schools. It needed to not create undue hardship for candidates in particular contexts. Continue to want to have EPP flexibility. We didn't want to reduce EPP flexibility. And then pipeline, similar to what we said at the goal, we don't want requirements to be so restrictive that they endanger the health of the pipeline. The point is not to prepare fewer principals. The point is to get to a more robust internship experience. Thank you, Dr. Jordan. So we engaged with a lot of questions. We put the task force through their paces here. We asked questions about, should we require candidates to complete the internship in a specific setting or multiple settings? Should there be guidance for what activities are completed? What are the requirements for mentor principals? Should we go for more than 500 hours? What's the length of time? What's the requirements for EPP partnership? We engaged deeply with all of those questions. Next slide, please. But we didn't start from scratch. So we started with the existing North Carolina rules with a place to start. There's not a lot of content in those rules, but it's a meaningful place to start. And then we engaged with 4 other categories of learning. One, the research in the field. Principal internship is not an area that is heavily researched, but we were tremendously fortunate to have a member of our task force who is key in the research in this part of the field. And so we kind of had a direct line to all of the research that has and is being conducted on the efficacy of the principal internship. So we engaged with the research from the field. Also, the North Carolina Principal Advisory Committee looked at internships a year or 2 ago and developed a set of recommendations and noticings of what they found in their analysis from internships across the state. And they had a set of recommendations that we can engage with. Third, we looked at other states' policies. I'll say there aren't many. There's really only one. Illinois is the only state that seems to have a policy or rule on internships that is much more developed than North Carolina's. This isn't a place where there are a lot of other states that have very developed rules. But we were able to engage with Illinois for sure. But this is a place where North Carolina's teacher internship rules are more fleshed out. And so we also looked at the teacher internship policies for guidance as well. So pulling from all of this research and through a lot of workshopping with the task force, we developed a draft set of revised rules, which was shared with the commission in advance of this meeting. So it's not up on the slide, but that's really the heart of it's the meat of the conversation, which is the actual content of what are proposed revisions to the rules, acknowledging that there's a long road ahead for them to go from proposed language to an actual rule. So that's all of the context. And then there's the content of the rules themselves, which hopefully the commission has had the opportunity to review. And so I'll pause there and we'll switch to questions here as well, either about our process or about the content. All are welcome. And same DPI colleagues, please feel free to add any context or details I may have forgotten.
So Erin, the next time, thank you for that. That was very clear. And the next time we see work around this, what should we expect to see?
Great question. I think what will happen next, and Dr. Jordan, please feel free to chime in, is for us to similarly socialize these draft revisions kind of in the field, get a little bit of additional perspective to pressure test it a little bit more, not in a super formal way, but to get some perspective, and would bring that learning back to the commission as well. But in the absence of hearing direct feedback from Pep-C on the particular language of the rules, or feedback from the field on the particular language of the rules, the proposed revisions are what we are seeking to advance. Dr. Jordan, how would you shape that?
So I think that you are spot on with just one small tweak. So we anticipate bringing to Pep-C next month proposed revisions to applicable policies and language for rulemaking.
And the groups that we're seeking outside feedback on, Dr. Jordan or Erin?
So the usual suspects, the local district HR leaders, as well as our EPP friends. And those are the two primary groups that we will hope to hear from should there be questions or concerns.
Great. All right. Any questions from commission members? Or any pause or things that you like? Okay. I don't hear anything.
Dr. Bullock, it's Connie.
Yes, Dr. Locklear.
I really don't know what to ask. I'm trying, it was so fast and trying to absorb it all, but how much feedback did you receive from the field?
We're just at the beginning of that moment now, so we're about to go public, as it were, following this meeting. So the task force itself represents a pretty diverse stakeholder group of different ed prep providers in different district contexts, all of which has already informed the draft language. And so, as Dr. Jordan referred to, kind of the next step is to get a slightly broader group of perspective.
And I guess the reason I asked that question, I know that you mentioned that earlier, and I also know that Dr. Bullock mentioned that we will come back together next week, I think the 27th, to decide if we want to move this forward to the board. I'm just wondering if we've had enough feedback from all stakeholders at this point to make that informed decision by the 27th. That's my concern.
Dr. Locklear, this item will not come back till April. The item that will come back next week will be the Pearson portfolio. I mean, the Pearson assessment only. This is a second item because we haven't had enough feedback from the field on that as of yet. On
Okay,
using,
well,
yeah,
thank you for that clarity. That's what I needed.
Sure.
Thank you.
yeah. There, since Aaron's doing both, sometimes we think of them as dual. I had that same question earlier, and I'm like, I'm not sure we're ready for this one. So, good question.
And to also name, this one is less time sensitive. The rollout of the portfolio-based assessment has kind of timing implications to when an EPP can pivot and shift. There is a little bit more wiggle room on the internship, and there's less time sensitivity.
Yeah.
And I should also note that this has been a request. There has been interest around framing the internship in a more systematic way. And so we think that this is an effort to do that. And I should also just note that we certainly had an opportunity to review, consider the internship requirements for teachers and the fact that those are and have been more robust than those that we have had available for principal internship.
Any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you, Ms. Larkin McGuire. We appreciate seeing you, and your clear presentations help with this work. And this has been a long bit of work from the task force, and we really appreciate what they have brought forward and their discussions. Dr. Griffin and I have attended some of those meetings, and they really have brought forth a lot of perspectives and tried to poke holes and make sure that this doesn't cause any type of angst or type of shutdown for certain types of programs, which is a huge piece, I believe. So thank you so much.
Thank you for that feedback, and we'll welcome all questions when we return to this topic. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that is the end of our business for today. So thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for the discussions today. I'll remind commission members that our next called meeting will be on Thursday, March 27th, 2025 at 8 a.m. to only discuss the principal portfolio assessment. Nothing else will be discussed at that meeting unless something comes up in this week that we're not aware of. We have now completed our meeting, and unless there is additional business at this time, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Connie.
Thank you, Dr. Locklear. And I believe we have a second from Dr. Smith. Is that fine?
Yes, I will second.
Okay, thank you. All right. Dr. Evans, are you calling for the vote?
Yes, I'll call the roll. Dr. Blanton,
Approve.
Chair Bullock,
Approve.
Dr. Fleming,
Approved.
Miss Edwards, you still on?
She is here. Yeah.
Okay, well, we can come back to her, or I can catch her afterwards. Miss Patton,
Approve.
I'm sorry, Dr. Penfield.
He had to step out.
Oh, that's right, he had to step away. Miss Hoskins,
Approve.
Dr. Weddington, yes, Miss Edwards, she said that she approved in the chat.
Approve.
Thank you, Miss Edwards. Dr. Weddington, you still there?
Approve again.
Thank you, Dr. Weddington. Mr. Smith
Approve.
and Dr. Winter.
Approve.
It is unanimously approved.
Dr. Locklear approves too. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Locklear.
All right. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.